Could you last 24 hours on a pirate ship? Forget Jack Sparrow. Forget treasure maps. The truth is, 8 out of 10 pirates died before they reached 30, and the lucky ones were the ones who got shot. The others rotted alive with scurvy, were devoured by infections, or dangled from a gallows while the crowd cheered. But here's the plot twist. Even knowing this, thousands of men chose this life. Why? Because the alternative was even worse. In the next few minutes, I'll show you what it was like to wake up every day, not knowing if you'd go to sleep rich, dead, or hanging from a mast. And why even so many would rather die free at sea than live chained on land. And why even so many would rather die free at sea than live chained on land. The answer lies in the world they left behind. Imagine 7th century Europe, not the one of gilded palaces and masked balls. The real Europe, the one where 9 out of 10 people never ate meat, where working 16 hours a day guaranteed at most a loaf of brown bread and a corner of the stable to sleep in. The wars had just ended. Treaty of Utrecht, 1713. Suddenly 400,000 soldiers and sailors were discharged, with no pension, no severance pay, no future. Men trained to kill, now competing for jobs that didn't exist. You were a sailor in the Royal Navy for 10 years. Congratulations. Now go back to your village and compete with 50 other men for the chance to clean stables for scraps. Was it this or the gallows for stealing a loaf of bread? But then the news arrived. Always in port taverns, always whispered, Henry arrayed $600,000 in gold. Each man in the crew received the equivalent of a lifetime's work. It was a lie, an exaggeration perhaps, but when your alternative is to slowly starve to death, even lies become hope. For runaway slaves, the math was even simpler. Recapture meant whipping until the flesh fell from the bones. Becoming a pirate, the same death penalty, but with the chance of dying with gold in your pocket and rum in your throat. And here came the seductive part. The pirate code offered something unthinkable in society at the time: a vote. A common sailor could have a say in the ship's course. He could dismiss an incompetent captain. He would receive his fair share of the loot, not the leftovers. Benjamin Horne-Gold, the famous pirate captain, was elected by vote. Bartholomew Roberts created a code where freed blacks had the same rights as whites. Unthinkable on land, possible at sea. Of course, no one told the part where 2 out of 3 new recruits died in the first year. Dysentery, scurvy, a knife in the back during a fight over rum. But when you're already condemned to death by society, what difference does it make how you die? Recruitment was simple and brutal, sometimes voluntary. A desperate man would approach pirates in the harbor and beg to be let aboard, sometimes forced. After capturing a merchant ship, the pirates would offer a choice: join us or swim to shore 50 miles away with sharks circling. The initiation ritual sealed the pact. Ship's articles were read aloud. Each man swore on crossed axes or a Bible pierced by a dagger. Breaking the oath meant marooning on a desert island. Keeping it meant brotherhood until death. And so a pirate was born. Not out of a thirst for adventure, not out of a love of the sea, but because between dying on his knees begging or dying standing with a sword in hand, the choice was obvious. The problem was that no one explained what the first day would be like. His pirate baptism began before he even stepped onto the deck. Even in the boat that took you to the ship, the smell hit you like a punch. Fermented sweat from 80 men who hadn't seen fresh water in months. Rotting wood, dried vomit, and beneath it all that sweet, sickening odor you would soon learn to recognize. Decomposing human flesh from some unfortunate man who died during the night and hadn't yet been thrown overboard. Welcome to your new home. The ritual began immediately. Paying tribute to Neptune, they called it. For the veterans, it was fun. For you, calculated humiliation. They tied you to the mainmast and poured a mixture of seawater, vinegar, and urine over you. If you vomited, and you would have to clean it with your own shirt, which would remain your only shirt for the next few months. Some ships went further, making you drink rum laced with gunpowder until you passed out, or hanging you upside down from the rigging until you begged for mercy. Why, simple. If you couldn't handle that, you couldn't handle what came next. Hierarchy was taught to you through brutality. The quartermaster tested each newcomer. Climb to the 6th of the gantry, 30 meters high, wet and slippery ropes, biting wind, the ship rocking with no protective screen. He hesitated, whipped, fell, and survived. He climbed again, fell, and died nearby. The veterans watched, betting on how long you would last. That one won't last past the first storm, they laughed. And statistically, they were right. Your first meal destroyed any remaining romance. The cook, usually a pirate who had lost a leg and was no longer fit for combat, would throw you a rock-hard piece of biscuit. You banged it against the table to make the larvae fall, the ones that fell. You ate the rest with it. Extra protein reminded you trying to vomit again. Rum was a brown liquid that burned your throat and clouded your vision. Pure water only on rainy days, if you could collect it in a rag. Otherwise, it was the same greenish water from the barrels, tasting of mud and smelling of rotten eggs. At night, you'd find your sleeping spot, a space less than half a meter wide in the hold. A hammock, if you were lucky, the damp floor, if not, sharing the space with fat rats who weren't afraid of humans. They were veterans, by the way. You were the invader. Sleep was impossible. The ship creaked as if it were about to split in half. Men screamed with nightmares of past battles. Others moaned, sick with dyspepsia, rushing to the buckets that served as toilets. The stench was so bad that many preferred to sleep on the deck, risking being swept away by a wave. But the real psychological test came the first morning. A veteran approached, scars covering his face, rotten teeth in a yellow smile. You know the first rule here, rookie. You shook your head. Everyone you see survived. Half of those who boarded with them didn't. Which half do you want to be? And then he'd hand you a rusty dagger. Guard it well, you'll need it. Not just against enemies. Morrison fell asleep drunk last week. He woke up with his ear missing. No one saw who did it. The formal oath came at sunset. The captain read the ship's articles. Each rule was a death sentence if broken. Hiding part of the loot, death. Deserting during battle, death. Raping prisoners, death. Curiously, stealing from a fellow pirate was punished more severely than killing a merchant. You swore on what they held most sacred. Not a Bible, but the ship's weapons, crossed pistols, a dagger stuck in a plank. Symbols that their violence was law, religion, and justice. Do you swear to live and die for your brothers? I swear. Do you swear the ship comes before all else? I swear. Do you swear you prefer death, capture? I swear, and it was done. You were no longer who you were on land. Now you were the property of the sea. And the sea, everyone knew, always took its toll. That first night, as you tried to sleep amidst the creaking of the timbers and the screams of other people's nightmares, a crystal-clear truth took shape. You had traded a certain slow death on land for a likely swift one at sea. The question now was how long you could delay the inevitable. The boatswain didn't need a bell. He kicked the barrel you slept against. Standing worms, the sea waits for no slacker. Your body begged for more rest. Your back throbbed from a night of poor sleep. But rising slowly meant being last in line for the morning rum. And without that sip of liquid fire in your veins, the day would be unbearable. The first task was always the same. Check how many had died during the night. It was no joke. There was dysentery, infected wounds, fights in the wee hours. Every dawn had its share. The bodies were stripped naked, clothes too precious to waste, and thrown overboard without ceremony. A prayer only if the dead were important. Otherwise, the only sound was the screeching seagulls. Then came the work that kept everyone alive, sluicing water. Every pirate ship leaked, planks split, wood rotted, and repairs were always temporary. If they didn't constantly bail out the water, the ship would sink in a matter of days, endless hours passing buckets. Hands developed blisters that burst and turned to raw flesh. Backs screamed, but to stop meant being branded lazy. And lazy people were given the worst tasks, like cleaning the sluice, the ship's sewage. A hole in the lowest hold where everything accumulated. Feces, urine, vomit, blood, and rotten food scraps. The stench was so strong that many fainted. Some suffocated and died right there, falling face down in the filth. But the truly deadly work was at the top. Gavia's sailor, those who worked the sails called them. Climbing 30 meters of wet, slippery rope was just the beginning. Up above, with the ship rocking, you had to furl or unfurl sails that weighed like lead when wet. A stronger gust of wind. You'd fly, and there were two ways to die. Fall to the deck and be turned to pulp, or fall into the sea and watch the ship drift away as it sank. Screaming was no use. Stopping the ship to rescue a man? Never. I saw veteran men, 10 years at sea, slip on any given morning and disappear. Their belongings were divided before noon. Pirate medicine was a nightmare in itself. The surgeon, that generous title for a sugar-coated man with medical pretensions, had 3 treatments for everything: rum, amputation, or death. An infected wound, amputation. The saw was the same one used for cutting wood, cleaned with a dirty cloth between patients. 4 men held you down while the surgeon sawed. If you were lucky, you'd pass out. If not, I felt every movement of the blade separating muscle and bone. The stump was cauterized with red-hot iron or boiling tar. The survival rate, about 30%, was optimistic. Most died of infection within 3 days, delirious with fever, begging for a death that had been delayed too long. Scurvy was the silent killer. It started subtly with bleeding gums, then teeth loosened and fell out. Joints swelled. Old wounds spontaneously opened. In the final stage, you literally fell apart, bleeding from every pore. The cure was simple: citrus fruits. But when you've been at sea for 3 months, lemons are more valuable than gold. I've seen men kill for a rotten orange. Discipline kept this hell going, but it wasn't the military discipline we know. It was brutal and arbitrary. The kiss of the gunner's daughter, being tied to the muzzle of a cannon and blown up. The embrace of the maiden being slowly pierced by nails. The right on the keel being dragged under the ship. The skin being ripped off by the clams stuck to the hull. Why punish? Sometimes for falling asleep on watch. Sometimes for looking at the bosun's mate. Sometimes just because the captain woke up in a bad mood. But the worst punishment was ruining. Marooned on a desert island. They left you with a pistol, a bullet, a canteen of water, and a knife. The bullet wasn't for hunting. It was for when thirst and madness became too much to bear. Amidst the horrors, unlikely friendships were born. The code of survival created bonds. You covered for your feverish shipmate. He shared his biscuit when yours rotted. You swore that if one of you died, the other would throw the body overboard before the rats could eat. Because that was another reality. The rats, fat as cats, unafraid of humans, ate everything. Food, clothes, ropes, and yes, human flesh, if you didn't move fast enough. Sleeping too drunk risked waking up with pieces missing. Free nights were spent in obsessive preparation. Sharpening knives until we could cut hair. Cleaning pistols until each piece gleamed. Training ourselves until our hands could do it themselves. Because when the cry of sail on the horizon echoed, seconds would make the difference between fortune and death. And that cry always came. That was what all that misery was for. For the moment an enemy sail appeared on the line between sky and sea. It was the moment when pirates stopped being mere survivors and became the terror of the seas. Port sail. Those 3 words changed everything. The entire ship transformed. Men who had crawled sickly suddenly ran. The captain climbed to the quarterdeck with his spyglass. The tension was palpable. Would it be easy prey or a disguised war frigate? The first rule of pirate combat: win without fighting. It seems cowardly. No, it was pure mathematics. Every battle meant dead men, spent ammunition, and a damaged ship. A captain who sought glory rather than gold wouldn't last a month. Therefore, the psychology of terror was a refined art. First, the disguised approach. They would hoist the French, Spanish, Dutch flag, anything that would make the target relax. They would change the sails to look like slow-moving merchants. Some even dressed the crew in merchant clothing. The distance was calculated by the meter. Too far and the target would flee. Too close, too soon, and they would discover the disguise. The perfect moment was when it was too late to flee, but there was still time to surrender. Then it happened. The false flag would go down. The Jolly Roger would go up, but it wasn't always the grinning skull we know. Blackbeard wore a skeleton, holding an hourglass and a spear pointed at a bleeding heart. The message was clear. His time was up. Bartholomew Roberts had a flag showing himself stepping on 2 skulls. One labeled BH, the Barbadian head, the other MH, the Martinican head. Personal revenge announced. The warning cannon was fired not to hit, but to demonstrate range. The silence that followed was deafening. On the target ship, the crew had seconds to decide: fight or live. Lower the sails, surrender. The relief was palpable. They would probably survive only without their cargo. Man the cannons war. And pirate warfare was different from military naval battles. There was no honor, formations, or rules. It was calculated brutality. The gunners aimed for the rudder first. A ship without direction was easy prey. Then at the masts, chains and iron bars were fired to destroy sails and rigging. Sinking the ship would never be possible. It would be like burning money. The real hell began with the boarding. The distance narrowed, 100 meters, 50, 20. You could see the whites of the enemy's eyes, hear their desperate prayers, hooks. Dozens of grappling hooks flew, trapping the ships like deadly lovers. The snipers fired muskets loaded with nails and broken glass, not to kill but to maim and terrorize. Then came the leap. It wasn't the graceful leap seen in the movies. It was pure desperation. You ran down the wet, slippery plank as bullets slammed into each other. You jumped, praying you wouldn't fall between the ships and be crushed. You fell onto the enemy deck like a rabid animal. The hand-to-hand combat was a sensory onslaught. The clash of metal against metal, screams in 5 different languages, the smell of burnt gunpowder mixed with fresh blood. The deck became slippery in minutes. Blood, seawater, viscera. Weapons were chosen for maximum terror. The pirate cutlass, short and wide, perfect for tight spaces. No technique was needed, just brute force. Boarding axes that could shatter skulls and hatches alike, pikes to push enemies overboard, improvised grenades, bottles of gunpowder, nails and shards of glass. Blackbeard tied lit hemp wicks to his beard during the fight. The smoke made him look like a demon from hell. It worked. Many surrendered just by seeing him. The unwritten rule, the first 30 seconds decided everything. If the resistance wasn't broken, it immediately turned into a war of attrition. And a war of attrition meant heavy losses on both sides. Hence the exemplary brutality. The first defender to resist was killed in the most violent way possible. Dismembered, decapitated, and thrown to the sharks while still alive, so the others would get the message. When the resistance broke, and it always did, the most dangerous phase arrived, securing victory. Pirates in a battle frenzy were animals. They wanted blood, they wanted revenge, they wanted destruction. The captain had seconds to restore order before they massacred everyone and destroyed their own cargo. Stop, the ship is ours. Discipline slowly returned. The prisoners were lined up. The decision about their fate was surprisingly democratic. The crew voted. Cruel officers known for whipping sailors, certain death, usually slow. Doctors, carpenters, navigators spared and invited to join. Ordinary sailors, it depended. If a pirate ship needed men, they were forcibly recruited, or even abandoned at the nearest port or island. Women were a complex problem. The code of most ships prohibited rape under penalty of death, not out of honor, but out of pragmatism. Disputes over women destroyed crews. They were usually freed and injured, but there were often many bloody exceptions. The looting itself was methodical. Everything of value was catalogued. Gold and silver, obviously, but also maps, navigational instruments, medicines, weapons, gunpowder, ropes, sails, food, drink, even fine clothing. A well-dressed pirate was more intimidating. The division then took place in safe waters. Each man received his share according to the code. The surgeon who saved lives received a bonus. Those who lost a limb in battle received extra compensation. Those who showed cowardice, nothing. But there was one detail no one talks about. The silence after the battle, when the adrenaline subsided, when you saw the faces of the dead, some your age, some younger, when the blood on the deck began to stink in the sun, when the groans of the wounded mingled with the creaking of the ship. It was in these moments that many asked themselves, was it worth it? The answer came with the weight of gold in their pockets. It had to be worth it, because the next fight could be tomorrow, or worse, they could be the hunted. And when they finally sighted land, when the lights of a friendly port appeared on the horizon, only one certainty pulsed in every pirate heart. We survived once again. Now it was time to spend like there was no tomorrow, because there probably wouldn't be. The first sign you were approaching a pirate port wasn't the lights or buildings. It was the smell, a mixture of spilled rum, rotting timber, stolen spices and poorly washed bodies, carried by the wind miles before land was sighted. Then came the sound, not the civilized sound of a commercial port. It was a cacophony of screams, hysterical laughter, occasional gunshots, breaking bottles and off-key music from at least 3 different taverns competing in volume. Welcome to Nassau or Port Royal or Tortuga. The names changed, but the essence didn't. These weren't simple ports. They were republics of chaos. Social experiments where the only law was the absence of it. In Nassau at its height, 2,000 pirates ruled themselves, with no king, no governor, no god but gold. The arrival of a successful ship was an event. Even as it approached, prostitutes rowed out in longboats offering an early welcome. Merchants shouted offers. Tavern keepers promised the best rum in the Antilles. Everyone wanted their share of the loot before you spent it with the competition. The first step ashore was always staggering. Months at sea destroyed the balance on dry land. Sea legs called. You walked around like a drunk, even sober, which didn't last long. The taverns were cathedrals of doom. The laughing skull, the dead parrot, the last drink. names that didn't hide intentions. Inside, the tobacco smoke was so thick it stung your eyes. The floor was a paste of sawdust, spilled rum, dried blood, and substances best left unidentified. The rum flowed like water, not the watered-down rum of the ship. Pure rum, strong enough to cleanse wounds or set a man on fire, mixed with gunpowder for courage, with opium when available, with anything that intensified oblivion. The women in these ports weren't all prostitutes, despite what the stories tell. There were merchants, tavern keepers, even female pirates in disguise. But yes, prostitution was rampant. Women from Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean, some volunteers, many not so much. A night cost a silver coin, a week part of their loot. Some offered more than sex information. Which ship set sail laden? Which captain were you recruiting? Which governor accepted bribes? Information was worth more than gold. The gambling dens never closed. Loaded dice, marked cards, fights over cheating that ended in stabbings. I saw men lose in one night what took months to steal. I saw others win entire ships in a single hand of cards. But the real business was happening in the shadows. The half-moon merchants, middlemen who bought anything without questions. That cargo of sugar bearing the East India Company's mark, they gave 30% of the market value in gold on the spot. No questions asked, no records. These merchants were the bridge between two worlds. By day, respectable citizens in London or Amsterdam. By night, financiers of maritime crime. Some became richer than the pirates they supplied. Alliances with authorities were complex. The governor of Nassau received 10% of all loot to look the other way. When pressure from London mounted, he would fake a raid, arrest a few drunks, and report progress in combating piracy. Everyone won. In Port Royal, he was even more brazen. Governor Henry Morgan, himself exiled, charged anchorage fees that were essentially legalized bribes. In exchange, he offered protection against warships. Sometimes captains' meetings were events in themselves. Imagine 5 or 6 of the most dangerous men in the Caribbean at the same table, each with their hand on a pistol, each paranoid, discussing alliances, betrayals, and attack routes. More meetings ended in gunfire than in agreement. Charles Vane and Jack Reckham nearly killed each other in a seedy tavern over a dispute, over who had the right to attack Spanish ships off the coast of Cuba. The only reason a massacre didn't occur was because Blackbeard entered and threatened to kill them both if they disturbed his drunkenness. Stories were common currency. Each pirate exaggerated his exploits. One captured ship became 3, 10 dead became 50, but some stories were too true to need exaggeration, like that of Stead Bonnet, the gentleman pirate, a wealthy farmer, who abandoned everything to become a pirate and died by hanging, begging for forgiveness, or Mary Read, who disguised herself as a man for years until she was discovered pregnant and died in prison. The slave market was the dirty secret that even pirates didn't like to admit. Yes, many pirates were anti-slavery in principle, but when they captured a slave ship, the dilemma was real. Freeing meant losing their fortune. Selling meant betraying their own codes. Most chose gold, but everything had an expiration date. After days or weeks, the money ran out. Creditors began to demand payment. The captain summoned the crew. It was time to return to sea. Many didn't return. Opium overdoses, stab wounds in a fight, venereal diseases that rotted from the inside out. Pirate cemeteries, when there were burials, were mass graves. Sometimes the body was simply thrown into the mangroves for the crabs. Those who survived on land returned to the ship, broken, sick, broken, owing more than they had earned, but with stories. And at sea, stories were what kept men alive when all else failed. Except the stories didn't mention one thing. While they drank and made merry, the world outside changed. New warships were built. Bounties on their heads increased. Tolerance waned. The party was ending and the hangover would be deadly. The year 178 marked the beginning of the end. King George of England had had enough. The Treaty of Utrecht had brought peace between nations, but pirates continued to raid. Each lost ship was a humiliation. Each stolen cargo, fewer taxes. Each atrocity story, more public pressure. The order was clear: cleanse the seas without mercy, without exception. Woodes Rogers arrived in Nassau with 3 war frigates and a proposal, a royal pardon for anyone who surrendered within 30 days. After that, he hunted mercilessly. Some accepted, most laughed. Little did they know they were laughing at their own death sentence. Royal navies had an advantage pirates never would. Infinite resources, new, faster ships with more cannons, trained and disciplined crews, intelligence bought with gold from the royal treasury, and above all, patience. They could pursue a pirate for months, years if necessary. The hunt began systematically. Blockades in known ports, infiltrated spies, bounties that would make any man think of betraying his captain. £1,000 for Blackbeard's head, £500 for Charles Vane. Even cabin boys were worth £10 dead or alive, and it worked. Paranoia destroyed more crews than cannons. No one trusted anyone. That new recruit was a spy. The quartermaster was secretly negotiating a pardon. The captain himself planned to hand them all over for amnesty. Blackbeard was one of the first great men to fall. On November 22, 1718, Robert Minard, a lieutenant in the Royal Navy, cornered him off the coast of North Carolina. The battle was brutal. Blackbeard took 5 musket shots and 20 sword cuts before falling. Even dead, it took 3 blows to sever his head. Hanging from the mast of Minard's ship, the head was displayed in every port along the coast. The message was clear. The most feared man on the seas was dead. You are next. Charles Vane's downfall was pathetic. He didn't die fighting. He was deposed by his own crew for cowardice. He fled in a sloop. He was captured drunk on an island, tried in 5 minutes and hanged in Port Royal. His body was displayed in an iron cage until the crows left only bones. Jack Rickham, the Chalice Jack, tried to retire. He was pardoned. He tried to live honestly. He lasted 3 months. The sea called. He returned to piracy and was captured with 2 women in his crew, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. The women escaped the gallows by claiming pregnancy. Jack swung from the rope on November 18, 1720. Annie Bonny's last words to him went down in history. If he had fought like a man, he wouldn't have died like a dog. Bartholomew Roberts Blackbart was the last of the greats. He captured 400 ships in 3 years. He thought he was untouchable. On February 10, 1722, a cannon shot ripped out his throat. The shocked crew threw his body overboard before he could be captured. Even so, 52 of his men were hanged en masse on the Gold Coast. Trials were public theatre. Admiralty courts didn't seek justice, they sought an example. The accused entered already convicted. The evidence was anything but. A suspicious scar, a foreign accent, a sailor's calluses. The defense was non-existent. Lawyers didn't waste their time with pirates. The execution ritual was calculated for maximum terror. The condemned man was carried in an open cart through the streets. Crowds threw stones, rotten vegetables, and excrement. On the gallows, they were entitled to their last words. Some confessed, others cursed. Many were too drunk to speak. Death was rarely quick. The short drop meant slow strangulation. The executioner sometimes pulled his legs to speed things up, sometimes not. The crowd loved it when the condemned man danced the jig of the hanged man, the final convulsions. But hanging wasn't the end. The bodies were asphalted, covered with tar for preservation, and hung in iron cages at the entrances to ports. They were called gibbet cages. They remained for years, sometimes decades, slowly rotting piece by piece, falling into the sea, until only empty iron creaking in the wind remained. Execution Dock in London had dozens of these cages. Arriving ships had to pass through this forest of the dead. Sailors swore they heard whispers from the corpses on stormy nights. Some tried to negotiate. Henry Jennings offered to return all the stolen gold for forgiveness, which he refused. He fled to Bermuda, lived as a farmer and died in bed. One of the few. Others became pirate hunters. Benjamin Hornigold accepted pardon and began to persecute former companions. The irony died when his ship sank, chasing pirates. The sea took its toll on him for his betrayal. Those who tried to hide found that the world had become small. Stead Bonnet disguised himself, changed his name, tried to pass himself off as a merchant. He was recognized by scars, captured and hanged in Charleston. Your last words, please, more room. Edward England fled to Madagascar. He thought he was safe. He died of dysentery alone, begging for water in a filthy hut. There wasn't even a funeral. The few who got royal pardon and kept it lived miserable lives. With no skills other than killing and sailing, they became drunken beggars in a tavern telling stories that no one believed. They died forgotten, buried in mass graves. The last gasp of the Golden Age was in 1730. Oliver Levasseur Laboux, hanged at Reunion, is said to have thrown a cryptogram into the crowd, shouting, "Find my treasure, whoever can." It was never found, probably never existed. And so it ended. Not with epic battles or heroic last stands, but with dirty, broken men swinging from ropes, watched by bored crowds who would soon return to their ordinary lives. The sea remained the same, indifferent, eternal, waiting for the next man desperate enough to challenge its immensity. But those men, those specific pirates who terrorized an era, became something they could never have imagined. Think with me. The same men who ate cookies with maggots, who died shitting blood, who were hung in cages until the crows ate their eyes, today sell billions in films, games, and Halloween costumes. Disney made $4 billion from Pirates of the Caribbean. 5-year-olds sing, "A Pirate's Life for Me," without knowing that they are romanticizing men who would kill their families for a silver coin. How did this happen? How do we turn the greatest psychopaths of the seas into heroes? Simple, because deep down, they did what we all fantasized about doing. They sent the whole world, if don't get me wrong. They were monsters, but they were monsters who looked at kings, popes, lords and said, "You don't rule me." In a world where you were born someone's property, they chose to die masters of themselves. And therein lies the paradox that no one wants to admit. We romanticize pirates because we envy their courage to choose. Even if the choice was shit, even if it ended in hanging, at least it was theirs. You're watching now. When was the last time you said no to something you knew was wrong? Post what if you chose risk over safety? Years in prison? I'm not saying to you become a criminal. I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, we romanticize pirates because they remind us that there is always a choice. Even if it's between two shits, it's still a choice. If this trip through the salty hell of real history has made you think differently about your own life, you know what to do. That little like button down there is your way of saying, "Thanks for not selling me Disney fantasy." And if you want more uncomfortable truths about the past that will make you question the present, sign up. Because next week I'm going to show you what life was like as a soldier on the Crusades. Spoiler: those noble knights ate human flesh when they ran out of food. It's the same as those in Honor and Glory films. By the way, do you see this video appearing on the screen? Watch after this. Comment below. If you were born in 1680, poor with no future, would you have gotten on that pirate ship? Be honest, not with me, with yourself. And share this video with that friend of yours who thinks they were born in the wrong time. Let him see what romantic times were really like. I bet he'll prefer working from home after this. Remember, the story they tell you is for you to accept the present. The real story is for you to question everything until next week. And don't worry, you don't have to choose between dying free or living in prison.